God in your life and to have a relationship with His Son, Jesus Christ. If we can help you in any other way in your spiritual walk with God, please do not hesitate to call upon us. For the last few weeks, we have been looking at sermons entitled Evidences. We have been looking at evidences that are contained in the Word of God, and we are examining those evidences in order that it might strengthen our faith and our belief in God and our understanding in that God knows better than we do. This was a political season that just ended, and we elected a new president, and we elected new members of Congress and state officials. And whenever there is a general election, and whenever there's election time, there always will be subjects that will come up and be discussed on a national basis. Unfortunately, one of those subjects that was very much in the discussion in this year's election is the subject of morality. And again, it's sad that in our country that this has become a political issue. But I want to suggest to you that morality and morals are not a political issue. They're an issue that have already been determined and already been deemed by God Himself. And so for the next few weeks, we want to examine the subject of morals. Are they relative? And what that simply means, are they relative? Are they changing? Are they subjected to the whims and the consciences and the dictates and the changes of the way that men think? So, do we believe, and does the Bible teach, that morals are relative? And really, the basic question that we are going to answer is, who determines morals? God or man? That's a very simple question. And we're going to endeavor, to the best of our ability, to give you the Bible answer in who determines the morals and morality. Does God or do the men? And we're going to use as our text to get us started in Jeremiah chapter 10 and verse number 23. Jeremiah wrote, O Lord, I know the way of man is not in himself. It is not a man who walks to direct his own steps. God, not man, sets the standards. We are not capable, nor are we qualified to set the standard of what God wants in our lives on any subject. And this is also true with morals. You see, God sets the standard because God knows what's best. God has all knowledge and all wisdom, and He created man, and He created this world. And so God knows best what the standards ought to be on any given subject. And that also includes the morals. It is not in man's ability, nor is it capable or qualified to know what's best for him, even though he thinks he does. But we're going to see that morals have been determined by God from the beginning of time. When man determines morals, he can rationalize, he can justify, he can enable, and he can accommodate, and he can excuse sin. Because he can change his mind, and he can change his theories, and he can change how he looks at things, and so it will accommodate sin, it will excuse sin, and he can rationalize and justify any behavior as being acceptable because it is something that people want and people demand, and so he just changes as the understanding and the whims and the desires of society changes. Then he just changes what's right and what's wrong. Again, man has the ability to do that and has done that for a very long time. But Isaiah warned about the danger of relabeling things. In Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20, it says, Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Selfishness, self-deception, reverse right and wrong. Today, we have a blurred line. The blurred line is that we are led to believe that the distinction between right and wrong isn't so easy to judge. And between light and darkness, it's really not that easy to judge. And so we've been led to believe that these things are relative, that what used to be maybe bad years ago, maybe it's not that bad today. And what used to be considered good behavior, well, maybe that's not so necessary today. Again, what that is, ladies and gentlemen, that is selfishness, self-deception. We are deceiving ourselves to believe that the standards of morality and the standards of morals just change and are relative with the changing fancies of people and society. Again, man can rationalize it in his mind. He can justify it. He can deceive himself. But he'll never get around the truth that's contained in God's Word that establishes the parameters and the standards of morals for society. When man determines morals, as we said, he can justify and enable and accommodate sin and the ever-changing understandings of people in the world. Evolution denies God and the Bible, leaving man himself to be the highest standard. Evolution, that we were created over and evolved over time and over the materials that are in the world, that we just evolved to what we are today, that denies the existence of God. That denies intelligent design. That denies orderly and an orderly universe. Again, though men have tried to justify that, that's why this is a theory. It is not a law. It will never become a law because it cannot be duplicated. It cannot be proven. And so it's merely a theory. But then you have existentialism. Each person's experience is true in his own way. There are no absolutes. Existentialism just simply means that each of us, by our own experiences, we establish and we determine what truth is. And therefore, there is no absolute. There's no parameters. There's no ultimate standard. There's no absolute right or wrong. And so it's just determined by each person's own experiences. And so we become a law unto ourselves. And therefore, with that type of thinking, there is no absolutes at all. There is no right. There is no wrong. It just depends on your experience. And again, that's going to lead us in a direction that we don't want to go. And in many ways, that is the kind of thinking that's led to many of the problems that we have to deal with in our society today. And then you have situation ethics. Moral right and wrong are relative and situational, not absolute. In other words, there are certain situations that we can change and we can alter maybe a standard that we once used to hold to. And so it depends on the situation. It depends on the situation. We've been told that there are certain situations that man can lie about, that they can lie, they can mislead, and they can deceive. And under certain circumstances, that's acceptable. You know, I'll give you one of the greatest basic examples in our society. We have determined and we have really groomed ourselves to accept the fact that politicians lie to us. It doesn't come as a surprise to us anymore. We kind of expect it. We know that they're not going to tell us the truth. We know that they're going to tell us whatever they what they believe we want to hear in order to get elected. And so we really don't hold them to a standard of truth because we know that they're not going to do it. And so anything they tell us or anything they say, we just really brush it off. We don't really hold them to it because it's just accepted that they're going to lie. Again, that's situation ethics. Because they're a politician and because they're running for an office and because not all people look at things the same, they can fudge a little and they can misuse the truth and they can twist a little. No, that's situation ethics won't work. If something's right, it's right. If something's wrong, it's wrong. And there are absolutes, and there are standards, and there are parameters. And even though man doesn't like this in religion, he accepts it in every other aspect of life, there's laws. Are we a law unto ourselves? Can we determine what we think is right and wrong in a law? Can we determine the laws that we'll obey and the laws that we don't? You know better than that. We don't determine that. We don't become a law unto ourselves. But when we get into religion, we believe that we can take privileges and we can come to reason in such a way that we can reason ourselves into anything being right. and we can use existentialism, or we can use situation ethics, or we can rationalize, or we can justify any behavior based on our experience and based on my own truth. But again, the question is begged to offer, is that responsibility God's, or is that responsibility man's? That's the question we want to seek to give an answer to today. Popular slogans for relative situation morality. Each man's conscience is a safe guide. What about a conscience that's blurred? What about a conscience that's evil? What about a conscience that's seared? If a conscience is a safe guide, it depends on what that conscience has been cultivated in. It begins on what that conscience determines what's right or wrong. What if somebody determines that certain behavior doesn't violate his conscience? Does that mean it's okay for him to do it, even though it might hurt other people? But if it doesn't bother his conscience, then that means that it's okay. No, I don't think we're going to accept that, and I know the law won't accept that. Man is free to do his own thing, and there's some truth in that. You are a free moral agent. You can do whatever you determine to do. You can choose the course that you walk down. You can choose the path you want to walk in, and you can choose the type of life you want to live. That's a truism. That's absolutely true. But with that freedom also comes repercussions and consequences. You can do that, but you must also accept the repercussions and the consequences that go with the choices that we make. Unfortunately, in our society, we want to try to escape that. We want to make bad decisions. We want to make bad choices, but then we don't want to accept the consequence. It doesn't work that way. And so again, that's not a truism. It feels right, do it. Well, again, we're making the individual the law. If it feels right to you, go ahead and do it. How far you want to take this type of reasoning? Well, if it feels right for you to have sexual relations with children, if that feels right to you, you go ahead and do it. Now, I know what you're thinking. So, Mr. Greer, you're being ridiculous, am I? Am I being ridiculous? If we leave it up to men to be the standard, to their experience and to their conscience, and to what they accept and what they will believe is right behavior. You know, there were years ago that we differed on things that we differ on today that we were more in agreement with, say, 50 years ago. And it's evolved to get further and further away from the truth, as we're going to see in these lessons. But again, if you're going to make man and his experience and his conscience the guide, and he's free to do whatever he wants, then how do we call anything sinful, or how do we call anything bad behavior or evil? Again, it's just up to the individual. Again, you are a free moral agent, but remember what we said, that it comes with repercussions and consequences when we make decisions. No one can legislate morality. Really? One person can. God can. It's true, society can't legislate morality. I can't make men live in a good moral life, and government can't make men live a good moral life. There is some truth in that we can't legislate and make men live the type of morals that we find in the Bible and according to God's standard. It is true, you can't legislate that. But God can legislate it. Now we can choose to make our own morals, and we can choose to make our own rules, and we can make our own standards, and we can determine the right or wrong of any behavior that we determine to choose to do so. But again, it comes back to the question, are we going to accept the consequences and the repercussions from that type of thinking and that type of reasoning? But you see, you can't have it both ways, ladies and gentlemen. You can't say in one hand that you're a free moral agent if it feels right to do it, and you can let your conscience be your guide, but at the same time not accept the consequences when you think that way and act that way, and when it hurts other people and it violates their rights and it violates their thinking, that you're going to have to accept the repercussions and the consequences for that type of thinking. Fornication, adultery, homosexuality are optional lifestyles. They're choices. They're not moral issues. This is the crux of the matter. This is exactly where this debate is at, even in our day and time. There was a time There was a time when we looked at these matters very differently than what we look at them today. Fornication, premarital sex, adultery, that's to have relationship with someone other than your spouse. Homosexuality, 2 men, 2 women. And these are all called optional lifestyle. It's just determined by a man's experience or a woman's experience and about their values and about their conscience. And so, therefore, their choices are not really moral issues. That's a false narrative. That's a false narrative, ladies and gentlemen. These individual parts of morality have parameters. They have guidelines. And God has established He is teaching on what He believes and what is the consequences of such behavior. Now, man, they can change their mind. They can alter their thinking. They can justify their behavior. But again, I come back to the fact that you also must accept the consequences and the repercussions when you do things that are contrary to the standard that has been established by God. There are going to be consequences for the individual and for society. And experience and history teaches that this indeed is true. And so this is where the crust of these lessons are going to focus, on who determines whether fornication, adultery, homosexuality, pedophile, and other moral issues, abortions and other moral issues, then who determines whether those things are right or wrong? Does man or does God? That's the question that we want to answer. And again, that question has been answered by the majority of people in our society that men make that determination. Well, I want to give you the counter reaction to that. I want to give you the counter answer to that by suggesting, before we go any further, that men do not set the standards of morality. God has set the standards of morality, and they are unalterable. They cannot be changed without grave and serious repercussions and consequences. And we will show you that in the Scripture. Popular slogan for relative situation morality. Woman should be free to choose abortion. It should be a woman's choice. And this big debate is over free to choose. A woman, it's a woman's body. She should have the right to determine what she does with that body, and nobody should tell her what to do with it. And so it's a matter of choice. And we should let the woman make the choice, and society and the government and even God can't legislate that morality on a woman. But in 12 weeks, you see, that's not a fetus. That's a person. And in 16 weeks, they begin to grow and take on human features because that is a life. Now, we talk about woman's choice. Fine. What about the choice of the womb? What about the choice, what about the choice of the infant? What about the choice of the child? Who speaks for the unborn? Who speaks for the unborn and about his life, her life? Who determines the right or wrong and the choice for them? Again, we've forgotten that. And again, because we've legislated it, and you know, we earlier said you can't legislate morality. Well, we're trying. In 1973, in the Supreme Court, Roe versus Wade, we legislated that abortion was acceptable. And since that day to this day, we have put over 1 billion unborn children to death. You let that number stick in your mind. 1 billion unborn children were put to death. Who is legislating morality? Man is trying to legislate it. But God says that that is murder. That's what God said about it. And God speaks for the unborn. And it's not a political issue. And it's not a moral issue. It's an issue of what does God's Word say about that. And again, it's not, if we give it a name, free choice. Free choice. So we get into this discussion that women ought to be free to choose. And again, we think that going to erase the wrong or right of the action. No. And whenever this discussion is brought up, we hear the word about incense and rape and the death of the health of the mother. But you do your homework, ladies and gentlemen. You do a little homework and a research into statistics. And what you will find is that incest and rape are less than 1% of all the abortions that are done in our nation are done for those reasons. Less than 1%. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say if we include the life of the mother, we go up to 2%. Okay, what are the other 98% were abortions done for? For what reason? Because they are a hindrance. Because they are a baggage that somebody doesn't want to carry around. They want the freedom to practice sex any way that they choose, but then when there's a repercussion, like I mentioned earlier, and the results are that they have to accept the consequences of that bad behavior, they don't want to, so they just want to get rid of it. And that's what the majority of abortions are done for in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, that standard has not been set by man. That standard has been set a long time ago by God because He values life. Who determines morals, God or man? Joseph Fletcher, who is one of these people who promote that man determines morals versus God's morality. The fallacies of man setting his own standard. Situation ethics produces no ethics. Mr. Fletcher's right. Fallacy of man setting his own standards is you have no standards. And the fallacy of situation ethics is there is no ethics. There's no right, there's no wrong, there's no end, there's no stopping point. That's the problem. That's the problem of going down this route of letting man set the standard. God, not man, must determine morals. Why? Because man's not capable. He doesn't stop. He doesn't consider all the things. And he is deceiving himself. And the devil's letting him deceive himself that he has a right to establish these morals and these principles, even though God's word is very plain on what they are. Situation ethic replaces Bible morality. Joseph Fletcher in 1905 was born and died in 1991. Situation ethic is the new morality. The Episcopalian priest ethics professor, then he's an atheist. Abortion, infanticide, euthanasia, let state kill defective children. Euthanasia, kill people with low life quality. Genius, improve the humanity of the gene pool. Again, he went from being a priest to being an ethics professor, now he's an atheist. And so he submitted that we could do abortion by infanticide and then euthanasia, that we could just kill defective children. We can just get rid of that problem by killing the child. And then euthanasia, we'll just kill the aged. We'll just get rid of the people that are taking up space, and we'll take care of the population problem. And then we'll improve the humanity gene pool. Again, you think these things aren't happening? They're happening in other places. But if you submit to the reasoning that man can set the standard, then he can do all of these things, and he can rationalize that it's okay because he sets the standards of morality, because he determines what's right or wrong. He determines the parameters of what man will believe in his morals. Again, this is the direction that we are going, because we are letting man determine morals instead of remaining with the standards that have been established by God. Love guides moral decisions. It allowed women in German POW camps to commit adultery with the guards, and then the pregnant woman could be released. Now, they were a prisoner, but if they had sexual relations with the guard and it produced a child, then they would let the woman go. And so you have a situation where you could commit adultery or fornication, and it would be okay because of the end result. It would bring another child into the world. Again, you can rationalize that in your mind, and they did during World War II. Is this true love for God, for a husband, for the guard, for the child conceived, and for the other POWs who don't have that ability? Where's the love in that? Where is the love as the motivation in that. There is none. Again, we're just talking about a human function. That's all we're talking about. But if you want to make man the standard, then that behavior is okay. Then that kind of understanding and reasoning, that's okay. If that's man's experience, if that's his thinking, if his conscience is clear about that, then it doesn't matter. Then it's okay. Love guides moral decision. Germans jailed her in the love of humanity. And then they began to use generic engineering. Then they began to use these women in experiments in order to do generic engineering. Does that make it right? Does that mean it's okay? Does that mean that it's justifiable because it didn't violate their conscience and because it was by their experiences and it was because they were trying to make a master race? Does that make it okay? It doesn't. Man's the standard. It doesn't. Man sets the rules and he sets the standard and the stipulation. Germans jailed her in love of humanity and then began to practice genetic engineering. But, you know, there's an outrage about this. Today, people talk about this and they're outraged. They can't believe that men in a nation use women and children in order to do experiments on genetic engineering. But back up. But back up. If man sets the standard, if man sets the parameters of morality, if man determines the right or wrong of a behavior, if man determines what's moral and immoral, if man does it, how can you oppose this? But yet, there was outrage throughout the world at Hitler and at the Germans for the genetic engineering. But again, I want to know why the outrage. Why the outrage if man can set his own standard? If man can determine right or wrong? If man can determine what's moral or immoral? And man can do it according to his own conscience. How can you violate this? And so you need to remember, this is the problem when you take and legislate the morality away from God and you give it to men. Where will it stop? That's the question that you need to consider.